It's another great day from the bridge. This is Rick Jones coming once again to you from the South Carolina Lowcountry. October is my very favorite month of the year. I like low humidity, warm days, and cool nights. The leaves are turning colors, college football is in full swing, and college basketball teams are in preseason practice. We're enjoying the last crabs of the season and the first oysters. Life is pretty good. We have an interesting show today all about nostalgia. Speaking of nostalgia, how many of you out there remember the great Stuckey stores? If you're of an age to remember tourist camps, Burma shave signs and two-lane blacktops, or even gas lines, Pintos, and crackling AM radio, chances are you remember the sprawling Stuckey's empire, a venerable roadside oasis and a highway heaven of souvenirs, cold drinks, hot snacks, and pecan candy, all marked by the pitched roof and teal blue shingles. Who could forget the pecan divinity, flavored pecans, or most of all, the celebrated Stuckey's pecan log roll, a heavenly inspired creation of Mrs. Ethel Stuckey herself, based on a secret mix of powdered sugar, white molasses, and roasted nuts. That mouth-watering miracle of fluffy white sweetness covered in its own deep coating of crushed select pecans became the soul and spirit of the store and the number one reason for families to stop. Well, along with using the restrooms, gassing up their cars, and having a snack and a soft drink, of course. Soon after founding, however, Stuckey's became more than a pecan log roller. From the late 1930s to the early 70s, the blue teal roof was as famous then as the golden arches are today. Sadly, in the 1970s, the empire began to dwindle when Stuckey's was purchased by a large corporation and became trapped in a time warp. Of the 350-plus locations operating in our heyday, the number dropped to a handful of stores. But in 1984, William S. Billy Stuckey Jr., the son of the founder and a 5-term congressman from the 8th District of Georgia, acquired the company and began to turn the company around. Under Stuckey Jr.'s helm, the Stuckey's Express, or the store within a store concept, was launched, and the company expanded to over 115 franchise locations on the interstate highways spanning 17 states from Pennsylvania to Florida, in the east, and to Texas in the west. In November of 2019, Ethel Stephanie Stuckey, Billy's daughter, took over as president and CEO of Stuckey's. Stephanie aims to continue the legacy started by her grandparents of providing a fun and quality experience for the roadside traveler through our brick-and-mortar locations, as well as expanding markets for Stuckey's pecan products via e-commerce and other locations. Stephanie Stuckey is my guest today to tell you her plans to bring back the brand. Plus, we'll take another trip to the SoapBox and a really great place to eat on the road with Rick. I recently produced a series on generational marketing that you can find on YouTube if you're interested. One of the 5 generations in the marketplace today is my generation, known broadly as the baby boomers. Many of you may know us today as the okay boomer put down, but that's okay with us too. Our generation is not perfect, but then again, neither are any others. You know, many marketers no longer try to reach baby boomers. I think they think we're dead. In fact, there was a fun ad campaign a few years ago from AARP. It had a couple laying together, and it looked like they were on a lounge chairs holding hands, and then you realize, no, they were actually on a gurney. in a morgue, and they had their toes already tagged as if they were dead. And I think a lot of marketers really do believe baby boomers are dead. But studies show that my generation still controls about 80% of the wealth in America, and that makes us a pretty good audience to reach. Baby boomers respond to nostalgia. When classic sports television became ESPN Classic Sports, they ran an ad campaign called Remember. The tagline went, "Remember when the games were great, bah, 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 bah." Well, they're all true. I've told you in the past about Trisha Yearwood recording a song called The Song Remembers When. This is a song about riding down the road, and you hear a song, and it can immediately take you back to where you were. It can make you laugh. It can make you cry. It can make you ache. It's amazing how songs do that. Nostalgia works the same way for baby boomers. We remember the rock and roll songs we grew up with, the athletes we worshiped, the TV programs we watched. Several years ago, I worked on a program called the Sears Directors Cup, which is now the Learfield Cup, that recognizes the top athletic program in the country. And, unfortunately or fortunately for Stanford, they seem to win it every year because they win so many spring sport championships. But one year I had a chance to go out to Stanford to actually make the presentation of the trophy on the field at a football game. And at that time, I was working on an advertising campaign for NCAA football. NCAA football was a new brand. It was a pennant that would go on the uniform and have the NCAA mark and could be customized for like an SEC mark or an ACC mark. Well, I was really struggling with how do you differentiate college football from pro football? I was really, really, really struggling. And when I went out to Stanford, I saw about a 75-year-old man dressed in, a red windbreaker and a red hat and red pants. Go Cardinal. And I watched him look at his 68-year-old wife like she was 19. And then I realized while we come back to college to be forever young. And so I created a campaign centered around forever young. Peyton Manning will always be young as a Tennessee Volunteer, even though he grew old in the NFL. Forever young. That's what I still feel like, as do many of my generation. Jimmy Buffett, another baby boomer, wrote a fun song called "I'm Growing Older, But Not Up." Anyway, I know this, 70 is the new 40. If you don't believe it, just ask a boomer. Speaking of nostalgia, I can still remember road trips throughout the South where we'd stop at a Stuckey store. I went to Georgia Southern College, now Georgia Southern University, based there in Statesboro, Georgia, and I'd drive past the Eastman, Georgia exit each time I went there. Eastman is the hometown of Stuckey's. Today we welcome the next generation of Stuckey to take the helm of the company, Stephanie Stuckey. Let's welcome Stephanie to the bridge. Stephanie, glad to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Well, I'm of that age, unfortunately. I'm that baby boomer guy that remembers Stuckey's very fondly. I've actually been to Eastman. I went to Georgia Southern, and I can remember all the times that traveling down I-16 and seeing the Eastman exit. And recently, my wife and I actually went to Walterboro, South Carolina, to one of your stores just to get a pecan roll.
I will be there later this week. I'm road tripping and hitting all of our South Carolina locations.
Well, when for us of a certain generation, when you hear the name Stuckey's, it brings a smile to your face. I mean, you remember road trips. You remember that, you stopped at a clean bathroom that made mom really happy, and dad filled up the car with gas, which made dad happy. But for us kids, it was all the great candies that you had there that we were always able to go out and pick something out.
I was listening to some of your podcasts over the weekend, and one of the things that really stuck with me, and I even wrote it down, and I know it's very basic, but I think it's important to remind yourself of the basics when you're running a business. And that was that a brand is a promise, right? And you really have to hone in on that if you are running a company or if you're involved in any aspect of the company. What is your brand promise? And you hit on a lot of the things that Stuckey's promises. It's going to be a comfort stop. It's going to be a stop where you can relax, refresh, and refuel. That was my grandfather's slogan. You know you're going to find certain strong, consistent standards that are being met when you pull over, or with any good brand. And I will push back a little bit on the of a certain age, because what's really been fun about my new career that I didn't expect running Stuckey's is how many people who are millennials tell me they love Stuckey's. I wasn't expecting that like you. I just assumed it was everyone who was a baby boomer. And by the way, I'm a Gen X. We're the forgotten generation. So Gen Xers definitely were around and road tripping when Stuckey's was more in its heyday. But a lot of millennials. I talked to a guy this weekend who said, my mother loves Stuckey. So it's usually an association with their parents, but it's a good association.
Well, I have millennial children, and they know all the music of my generation. We laugh about that. You know, somebody will say to Ryan, you know, well, how do you know that song? He goes, because my dad played it over and over and over again. And of course, I know that. So I think there is some multi-generational stuff. But I want to start here. You know, your grandfather started this. Your dad was involved with the business, but not you. So tell me about you. What were you doing before you decided to take over and help bring the brand back?
Yes, I had a whole career independent of Stuckey's. I'm 50-ish, I like to say. I was the same age as Ray Kroc when he started McDonald's when I took over the reins of Stuckey's. So that gave me a little confidence to know you can do a bit of a pivot in your life trajectory and hopefully find success. We're trending in the right direction. I feel like Stuckey's is on the right path. But my career was law. I'm an attorney, went to the University of Georgia undergrad and law school, and huge fan of state schools. My mom went to Georgia Southern, and some of the best people I know went to community colleges and went to state schools. And my mom and I were just talking today how you can get a good education everywhere, anywhere. You just have to apply yourself and have grit. But I digress. I was an attorney. I worked in the Georgia prison system. I was a public defender. I ran for office and was elected to 7 terms, 14 years in the Georgia legislature, representing a district in the Atlanta area. And then I found myself really passionate about environmental issues, and that's what I focused most of my legislative work on. So I transitioned. I left politics the best way you can. I did not seek re-election. And I ran an environmental nonprofit law firm for over 3 years and represented river keepers and Sierra Club and helped get clean air and clean water and clean land. Our our slogan was, we give Georgia's environment its day in court. And then I got an amazing opportunity to be head of sustainability for City of Atlanta. And I did that for over 3 years and was working as an environmental sustainability consultant and an adjunct law professor at the University of Georgia when my dad's former partners asked me if I wanted to take over Stuckey's. I guess the lesson I want to bring to people listening to this is be open to changing careers when there's an incredible opportunity that comes your way. I never thought I'd be sustainability director for a city or that I'd run an environmental law firm, but the opportunities presented themselves, and you just have to look at your life's experiences. And I think the skill sets you need for some of these career changes aren't always what you would expect. You can learn a lot of the actual details of these jobs if you have emotional intelligence, if you know how to organize and motivate people, if you have good business sense. A lot of these skills are transferable. So I would definitely encourage folks to consider when one career opportunity presents itself that's different from what you've been doing to really consider taking that leap.
I remember when I first got married, we lived in Druid Hills in Atlanta, and we went to a Methodist church that we affectionately referred to as the church for the newlywed or the nearly dead. It was a lot of blue hairs there from that neighborhood, and I remember doing the stewardship, the lay sermon, and I said, for those out there that think God's through with you, I have a test. And I made them hold up two fingers and then touch their carotid artery and say, if you still feel a pulse, God's not finished with you. And so,
Right.
You can pivot, I think, at any time. And I think it's interesting that you brought up Ray Kroc because, the great success that McDonald's had was under his leadership late in life. And you're now in the same place. But I think you have to start with passion, and you have to start with an understanding of the brand. And the fact that you grew up in the Stuckey family gives you, I think, a unique perspective on the DNA of the brand. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I am the brand, right?
Yeah, you are. No place to hide.
I have a branding expert who consults with me, and we look at analytics on the different posts that I put out there on the different social media forums. And consistently, the ones that perform the highest are the ones with photos of me and photos of my grandfather telling our personal stories. And it is our name up there on the billboard. I think it's important to highlight what your strengths are. I'm a big fan of the Strength Finder book, if you've read that. And I think I've taken that test 3 times.
Absolutely.
And every time my strengths are the same. So I think it's consistently given me some good feedback throughout the years of my different career opportunities. But you go with what your strength is. Stuckey's strength is we are a family business, and we have a good story to tell about our family. And I think that's something now more than ever that people are connecting with. Our country is hurting. The economy's hurting. There's a pandemic. There's all sorts of political uncertainty. There's racial and social unrest. And people are really looking for some things to make them feel positive. And so the more I can bring that passion to the table with how I present the brand and have it be authentic, which it really is, I think people identify with that. And the fact that we're real people behind our brand. I was talking with a friend just yesterday about how so many of my favorite brands have fallen out of family hands, and they're now owned by big corporations, and it's just not the same. It loses something.
No, they mess it up. They don't understand the DNA. It's almost like all the things that you created, they go, nah, we don't want to do that.
Well, it's all about profit.
Yeah.
It's all about profit. And I think too often the Wall Street types, and I don't mean to put them all in a bucket, but I am just for purposes of this conversation, they just look at the bottom line. They look at the numbers, and they don't realize that what people are buying into is the brand and the story and that emotional connection that they feel. They're not necessarily buying it because it's the absolute best product there is. Now, of course, I want to say that our pecan log rolls and our candy and our nuts are the best, but it's more than that. I don't necessarily think Nike is the best shoe ever made, but I buy Nike because I love their brand ethos. So I buy Tide detergent because my mother bought Tide detergent, and Joy dishwashing liquid because that was my mother's favorite. It still is. My mom's still around. But there's a connection there, and that's something that too often is lost sight of. Stuckey's is so lucky in that we fell out of family hands for decades. We were run by a corporation, and we saw what happened to the brand. It suffered. We lost hundreds of stores. It was trashed, really. I would go to our stores during those dark ages of Stuckey's, and I remember just almost being in tears seeing how badly the stores were run without a Stuckey at the helm. And that's what happens quite often when these classic brands, nostalgic brands, fall out of family hands and get run by corporations that don't understand and connect with what made it special. And that's why I feel so passionate about taking it back.
Well,
it needs to be, you know, my dad got it back, and then my dad retired for a decade and kind of left it on autopilot. Yep. And now I'm taking it back and pumping new life into it.
This is a generalization, too. You mentioned about Wall Street, but I've always believed that short-term greed is usually always bad. and long-term
Yes.
greed is usually always good. And when you look at everything around, when you look at everything in a quarterly, mechanism, what did the share price do in this quarter to run your business? I think you lose sight of the business, as a whole, and it's interesting. I'm also a big believer that, only profitable businesses can give back and can serve communities. Your family had a great ethos, and maybe it came directly from your grandfather's value system, but your family was known, and Stuckey's was known for first and foremost community service, political service, charitable service. Your family built a business, and then from the success of the business said, I think we have something to give back politically and community-wise, not only your dad, but you.
Well, and my grandfather served in the state house.
Yeah. So
my father was in Congress, and then I was a state rep, and I got to serve with some state representatives, some legislators who served with my grandfather.
Wow.
Yeah, like Speaker Tom Murphy was a freshman when my grandfather was a freshman. They were freshman reps together, and Speaker Tom Murphy was the longest serving speaker of any legislature in the U.S., and he was Speaker of the Georgia legislature for decades. He was an institution, and I was so fortunate to have served under him and learned from him. So yeah, we've all been in politics and public service and gotten out of it too. I think we all had shared the idea that public service should not be a career, should be something you do for a certain period of time and then you step aside. When you make it a career, this is just my belief, but I
believe this too. Say it loud and proud, darling. Yeah.
is that once you make it a career, you get so beholden to being reelected, and that is your identity. And I served with people like that. They had no identity or sense of self or place or being unless they had that title in front of their name. And I was perfectly okay walking away from that title because it's not about you. It's about the work you want to do. And I felt like I was no longer effective when I was a legislator because I was no longer in the majority party, which I think is so unfortunate. I think minority voices should be lifted up more in politics, and there should be more consensus building and moderation. There's so little of that today. That's a whole other show.
Well, it's interesting. I tell everybody I'm an Eisenhower Republican. And somebody said, what does that mean? I said, both parties wanted to nominate him in 1952. That's how, that's how close we were at the time.
That's beautiful. Well, my political consultant for the entire time I was in office is a Republican.
Yeah.
I was one of his few Democratic clients. And for me, it wasn't about partisanship. It was about connections. He and I went to University of Georgia together. We used to debate each other in debate club. And I was on the liberal side. He was on the conservative side. And afterwards, we'd go out for beers and we'd find commonality. And we're losing that in this country right now more than ever. And I have lots of family members who are supporting Biden and Trump. And I love them all. And, I'll be glad when we're past that. I did want to go back to something you said, though, because I've heard it in previous shows. Only profitable businesses can actually get back. And I agree with that to a certain extent. But right now, Stuckey's is on the comeback. We are trending in the right direction. Honestly, when I took on the company, we were not profitable. We are now profitable. But we're not profitable to the point where we can be super philanthropic and sponsoring scholarships and starting a foundation. We're not there yet.
Yeah, but you're hiring people.
Aspire to that.
But you hire people. And that, in my opinion, right now, job creation is very, very important in America.
We have not fired anyone.
Yeah, that's right.
What I'll say.
That's
and
great.
I'm hiring consultants. I'm being very cautious and conservative in our approach to bringing on support for Stuckey's. And right now, most of the additional support is going to be through consultants instead of full-time hires. And I think the future of work is largely entrepreneurs. So getting to the point of how we are giving back, I think there are ways to give back short of actually having a foundation, and that is hiring entrepreneurs, I am trying to be very thoughtful in the vendors that we choose. We manufacture all sorts of merchandise with Stuckey's logos on them. We don't manufacture that in-house. We outsource it. And so I started in this job when I was reaching out to vendors and asking them the typical, what's your price sheet? What's your landed cost? What's your FOB? What's the minimum order quantity, and getting all those basics related to the pricing and the financials. And now I've started asking, what's your story? What's the history of your company? Are you a family business? Are you a startup? Or do you hire minorities? Do you give people a leg up? Do you have veterans? Do you have disabled staff? So that's a way I can give back and support other businesses that are aligned with our culture and our values without necessarily cutting a check. And I think that has so much more meaning than some of these posts that you see by corporations like, we're giving back to the community. We're doing, this one check, we're one-off check. And not that doesn't have value, but I would like to see part of how we do business at Stuckey's is supporting other small businesses, supporting other family businesses, supporting American businesses where we can have jobs that we're spurring in these small communities across this country that are really suffering right now. So that's what I'm working on. And it's hard sometimes. It's hard to find American-made products.
It really is, especially in apparel and we do a lot of work in college sports, and there's a thing called the Fair Labor Association that really tries to make sure that everything that's sold on a college campus was produced in an appropriate way, and no sweatshops and all this kind of stuff. I do believe that the pandemic has woken up a number of Americans on both sides of the aisle, the fact that we do need to bring some manufacturing back. My mother, my late mother would say late in life, she was an Augusta, Georgia girl, but her family was from South Carolina, and she would ask me, are the mills going to ever come back? And of course, I would say, no, Mama, the mills are never going to come back. Well, I don't know now. I don't know. I mean, there's an infrastructure in South Carolina of the ability to maybe bring back some manufacturing to our state, and small businesses being able to do that in smaller batches, and who knows what kind of things going to happen. I have noticed, though, historically, and again, this is a little bit of a generalization, but I have noticed that in many cases, the third generation of family-owned businesses sometimes either mess it up or they sell it off. It's like that's the one that they cash out. I find it a little bit ironic that you have come back as the third generation to restore the integrity of the brand. Talk about that a little bit.
I think what makes Stuckey's unique is that it did fall out of family hands. That was a bit of a throwing cold water, slap in the face moment for us. Well, more than a moment. It was decades in the trajectory of the Stuckey's history. So that really makes me passionate about wanting to turn this company around. I also think being older brings maturity, and I talked earlier about emotional intelligence, and one of the people I'm reading a lot of right now is Warren Buffett, the Oracle of Omaha, and he talks about emotional intelligence. He talks about he looks at companies that have corporate leadership that have emotional intelligence, and he invests for the long term. He's not looking at quick returns. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned reading Warren Buffett in many ways. And I know you're a big Jimmy Buffett fan. He and Jimmy Buffett are friends, which I think is
they are.
Cool.
I think that's kind of cool too. And I think when you go see Warren Buffett in Omaha, he takes people that come to see him out for a milkshake, which I really like. I mean, that's his kind of signature thing. We're going to sit in a diner and we're going to share a milkshake, and I'm going to share wisdom. And I think the milkshake says something about his character and the fact that we're in this for the long haul. When he buys companies, he buys into management. He doesn't buy sick companies. He buys healthy companies
Yes.
that he feels like he can take great management and scale it and make it even bigger and better versus the classic corporate raiders, that buy what I call sick businesses, prop them up enough to spin them off, and really there's no long-term value there. Like I said, I'm a believer in long-term value.
Yeah, you talked about management, and actually a quote from Buffett is what helped convince me I should take on this crazy journey of running my family's business. And that is, he looks at companies in part that really haven't had strong management, but are still making it, right? And when I took on Stuckey's, we had not been profitable in a few years, but we were still around. We never went bankrupt. We've always managed to keep the lights on and pay our bills and continue operations. And the fact that was accomplished in spite of the fact that for the past decade, Stuckey's really hasn't had a management team. We haven't had a CEO. My father and his team retired, and they left a skeleton crew running the company. God bless them. They're still on board. They're still critical part of our team, but it's a great brand. And that's what has given me hope that we can turn things around. But to your point about the third generation, I think what distinguishes where I am with Stuckey's is that I didn't grow up with the company being in family hands. We fell out of family hands the year before I was born. So I did grow up knowing my grandfather, but I never had that sense of, well, someday I'm going to have this company, because it wasn't in the family anymore.
Yeah,
right?
So there was no entitlement at all there.
Yes, there was
Correct.
none of that. Not only that, I'm number 4 of 5 kids. I'm number 5 of 7 grandchildren. And frankly, I'm the girl. And I was never considered the heir apparent. So there was zero sense of entitlement on my part. And this was just an unexpected, amazing opportunity that came my way, and I grabbed it.
What one thing have you learned that you didn't expect when you got into this?
Well, the ability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. I never thought we would have a pandemic, right? Nobody does. And I think having to really quickly pivot was something that I did not anticipate right out of the gate. And literally I took on the company in November, and a few months later the pandemic hit. And what we've had to very quickly learn, and we're putting this in place, and I think all businesses are learning to do this, or else they're not going to survive what's happening with our economy right now, and that is diversify. You can't have all of your revenue streams from one source. So I quickly realized we've got to up our online game, and our online sales increased 5-fold within a matter of months. Not just because organically people are shopping more online, but because we completely revamped our website. We started offering more product selection. We started doing Google ads. We got ourselves on Amazon, which took a couple months because we were unfortunately on probation with Amazon from something that happened years ago. So we upped our online game. I can't talk about this a whole lot just yet. This is a little premature, but we're very close to having manufacturing capacity in-house with Stuckey's. So we're adding a whole new business line. We are soon to be expanding into the fundraising business. So we're putting the pieces in place to have more diversified revenue streams.
It's funny when you mentioned that. At one point when we were talking earlier today, I thought about Krispy Kreme and how Krispy Kreme traditionally has gotten into the fundraising business, where they'll hand a dozen donuts to a church group or school group, and then they can mark it up and make money. And I've always thought your product lended itself to that in a big way, because again, it's like Girl Scout cookies. It creates a smile. It creates, a small piece of joy. I will say this, Stephanie. I think coming out of COVID, there's some positive trends that are going to really help your brand. I think we got back to what I call wanting comfort. We got back to, we saw yeast. Nobody could buy yeast because everybody's making bread. Everybody's, my wife always talked about the freshman 15, the 15 pounds that girls gain. She said this COVID 15 is the one that killed us. You start making casseroles again with the, but I think old brands came back, craft came back, just comfort. But the second trend I'm seeing is people want to be back out. They want to get back out on traditional road trips. We're seeing great growth in RVs. We're seeing, park attendance go up. We're seeing picnics go up like crazy. I can't tell you how many times I've been driving around and seeing, families outside in a roadside park someplace having a picnic. And so that combination of I want to be out, I want to have these little short jaunts of joy lends itself to, and I'm going to pull in the Stuckeys. I really do believe there's some trends there that are going to help you.
Jaunts of joy. That's terrific. I might steal that for a social media post.
That'd be great.
That's really
no problem.
Good. Yeah, the road trip is back. And in many ways, Stuckey's is synonymous with the history of the Great American Road Trip. We peaked in the 1970s. And even though Stuckey's had fallen out of Stuckey family hands at that point officially, the first company that bought Stuckey's, my grandfather remained president of the Stuckey's division for a good decade. So really that whole era of getting in the family Woody station wagon. And since I was number 4 or 5, I was stuck in the way back without seatbelts where the air conditioning usually didn't get all the way back there. So it was a very sweaty ride, but I absolutely loved being in that back. And you play car games, and you would get the trucks to honk. And we had a CB radio, and we would all try to get on there and pretend we were truckers. Like that whole culture and era, that's when Stuckey's was at its peak. So we're part of the road trip. And then when the road trip lagged and declined, that's when we lagged and declined. In the late 70s, there was the oil embargo, there was the Airline Deregulation Act. So car trips got expensive, plane trips got cheap. And it wasn't about the journey anymore. It was about the destination. Nobody talks with weepy, teary eyes and getting sentimental about some plane trip they took. Or maybe they do, but I haven't heard them. People talk about their car trips, right? And you can't pull over when you're flying 30,000, 40,000 feet up in the air and go visit a petting zoo or some guy who built a UFO welcome center in his cotton patch, which I'm going to visit this coming week, by the way. That's what makes this country great, and that's what makes vacations fun, in my opinion. And so we want to bring that back. I'm excited. RV sales are 40% up, and people are stopping more along the way, and we're going to be part of that.
Well, I think you are. I think you got a tremendous opportunity at the right time, the right leadership, the right ideas. This intersection of nostalgia and the practicality in a COVID world of let's get in a car that we control. Let's go to places that are clean. Let's be outdoors and have picnics. Let's for sure share a big old pecan roll. That's a pretty good life. Stephanie, before we run, one more thing. What one more words of wisdom do you have for our audience?
For your listeners only, we will create a landing page, and you can put it up on your podcast notes and on your website. And your listeners can sign up. I'll have it up for the month of October, and they can sign up. And then at the end of the month, I'll just randomly select a winner, and you will get a Stuckey's retro cap. And I can send you a picture of it. The cool thing about it, we've gone back to our original logo, and the original logo is how my grandfather signed his name. It's really beautiful.
That's very, very cool. Well, I know our listeners will appreciate it. And again, we thank you for being with us today from the bridge.
Thank you.
Staying with the theme of baby boomers and nostalgia, let's get back up on the soapbox. For Southern males of a certain generation, beach music has always been a part of our lives. It's that old rhythm and blues soundtrack of our past that reminds us of good times and cold draft beer at some breezy dance hall on a nameless beach somewhere in North or South Carolina. One of the great beach music bands of the 1950s and 60s were the mighty Tams from Atlanta, Georgia. They closed every concert with their standard ode to life: be young, be foolish, be happy. Well, that old place where you used to dance is closed down, and the band has stopped playing. But those words linger forever. Decades later, it's still a great way to think about life, to live life. So may your beers always be cold. May your date always be good looking. May the song linger forever and ever. And may you always be young, foolish, and happy. And that's the soapbox. Let's get back on the road with Rick. I told you last week that we actually had a chance to get back on the road last month with a week's trip to the Outer Banks. We stayed a couple of nights on Ocracoke Island. You have to take a 2.5-hour ferry to get to Ocracoke, but while we were there, we ate at an amazing restaurant, Dagio. This place absolutely rocks. All local seafood and farm-to-table dishes prepared just right. In fact, many of the vegetables they grow right there in the backyard of the restaurant. I had a terrific fish chowder, and Charlotte had a salad with a cilantro vinaigrette. And then we shared a grilled cobia with a Veracruz sauce and saffron rice. It was one of the best dishes I've ever had. They also have char-grilled local oysters, crab cakes, crab mac and cheese, and shrimp and grits, among other dishes. If you find yourselves in the Outer Bank of North Carolina, take the 45-minute ferry from Hatteras over to Ocracoke to eat at Dagio. You won't regret it. That's our show down memory lane today. Thanks for being with us from the bridge.